The wooden post stood in the center of the POW camp yard, rough and splintered. The rope pulled tight around the nurse's wrists as soldiers and civilian workers gathered in a restless circle. The accusation had been shouted twice already: enemy signaler, traitor, collaborator, and each repetition seemed to harden the faces around her. A guard held up a folded report, claiming she had been seen near the outer fence the previous night, when convoy lanterns flickered in the distance. She did not beg. She did not cry. Dirt streaked her uniform, and her medical armband was half torn, but she stood straight, despite the rope biting into her skin. Engines rumbled somewhere beyond the barracks, the low vibration of supply trucks warming up for departure, and the timing of it all pressed like a weight on her chest. When the captain pushed through the crowd, boots striking gravel with controlled urgency, the murmuring dipped but did not stop. He took in the scene in one steady glance: the rope, the report, the trembling clerk who would not meet his eyes, and then looked directly at her. "You were seen signaling," the guard insisted. But the captain did not raise his voice. He stepped closer, close enough to see the faint ink smudge along her cuff, close enough to hear her breathing. "The route is wrong," she whispered, her voice hoarse but urgent. "They switched the convoy markers after inspection. The lead truck is carrying the wrong crates. It will turn at the river bend." The engines grew louder, closer now. Someone in the crowd scoffed, accusing her of inventing stories to save herself. The captain studied her face, searching for panic, for deceit, but found only precision. "How do you know?" he asked quietly. "The stamp on the clearance paper," she replied. "The seal was darker this morning, fresh ink, and the crate numbers, 2 digits transposed." The guard laughed nervously, yet sweat beaded at his temple. The convoy horn sounded once, a signal for final roll call. The captain reached for the rope without announcing his decision. The knife flashed, slicing through the coarse fibers in a single, controlled motion. Gasps rippled through the yard as her hands came free. "Untie her," he ordered firmly, though the rope already hung loose. He turned to the nearest runner. "Hold the convoy. No truck leaves this yard." Protest erupted from a senior sergeant who warned of delay penalties and command reprimand, but the captain ignored him. He faced the nurse again. "You will walk with me," he said, not as a favor, but as an operational directive. Around them, the circle of soldiers shifted from accusation to uncertainty. If she was lying, the convoy would be delayed and the captain disgraced. If she was right, hundreds of men were driving toward an ambush. The engines idled impatiently beyond the gate as the captain led her toward the command tent, the severed rope still swaying from the post behind them. Inside the command tent, the air felt tighter than the yard outside, thick with diesel fumes drifting in from the idling convoy, and the metallic scent of damp canvas warmed by the sun. The captain cleared a table with one sweep of his forearm, scattering pencils and folded manifests as the nurse stepped forward, rubbing circulation back into her wrists. A runner dropped the convoy clearance folder onto the surface, its edges worn, its stamp prominently marked in red. "Explain," the captain said, not loudly, but with urgency that cut sharper than a shout. She pointed immediately to the authorization seal. "This was stamped after dawn," she said. "The ink is darker than yesterday's rotation. Compare it." The lieutenant beside them frowned and pulled out yesterday's document from a side drawer. The difference was subtle, but undeniable. Then the alignment of the seal was off by a fraction, the eagle's wing overlapping the borderline where it never had before. Outside, a truck horn blared again, signaling impatience. The captain's jaw tightened. "Clerk duty this morning?" he asked. The lieutenant hesitated. Meyer signed the release. The nurse leaned closer to the map pinned on the tent wall. "And this," she continued, tracing the convoy route with steady fingers, "was altered." The captain stepped beside her. "Show me." She tapped the river bend where the supply column was scheduled to turn east. The chalk marker was moved 6 inches north. That changes the crossing point. The lieutenant shook his head. It's the same bridge. No, she corrected calmly. It leads to the old timber crossing. Narrow, exposed, us invisible from the tree line. Silence fell for a moment as the implications settled. The captain turned sharply to the radio operator. Contact the lead truck. Hold position. Static answered first, then broken fragments of acknowledgement. The nurse opened the clearance folder and flipped to the crate manifest. These numbers, she said, pointing to the first vehicle's cargo list, were transposed. The medical supplies were replaced with munitions. If detonated near fuel drums, the blast would cripple the column. The lieutenant swallowed hard. That would mean someone inside approved the switch. The captain's gaze shifted to the tent entrance, where shadows moved outside. Or someone forged the approval. Another horn blast echoed through canvas walls, sharper now, as the convoy commander demanded orders. The captain exhaled once, then made his decision. Seal the yard, he ordered. No one leaves. Bring Meyer here. The nurse stepped back, waiting for resistance, but the captain's posture made it clear that hesitation would not be tolerated. The radio crackled again, confirming the trucks were idling at the gate. Soldiers began to murmur beyond the tent as word spread that departure was delayed. The captain picked up the altered document once more, running his thumb along the inked edge. It smudged slightly under pressure, fresh. You're certain? He asked quietly, giving her one final chance to waver. She met his eyes without blinking. If they follow that route, they will not make it past the river. The tent flap snapped open as Meyer, pale and rigid, stepped inside. The convoy engines roared louder, an impatient chorus pressing against the canvas walls, while the captain laid the forged paper flat on the table and prepared to decide whether to expose a saboteur or send hundreds of men into a trap. The map room occupied the rear section of the administration barracks, a narrow wooden space lined with pin charts, grease pencil markings, and overlapping route overlays that smelled faintly of dust and ink. The captain entered first, carrying the altered clearance folder, while the nurse followed close behind, and the lieutenant shut the door to keep the growing unrest outside from flooding in. Engines continued to rumble beyond the walls, a reminder that every passing second tightened the margin between suspicion and catastrophe. The central map table held the convoy's designated route in chalk, arrows drawn from the supply yard toward the eastern river crossing. The captain placed the forged document beside it and pointed to the marking at the bend. "Show me what you saw," he said. The nurse stepped forward without hesitation, knee scanning the lines. The original chalk was dull, she explained, brushing a finger lightly across the route. This section is brighter. It was redrawn. The lieutenant frowned. That's standard correction. She shook her head. Not this close to departure, and not without updating the secondary grid reference. She reached to the corner of the table where coordinate logs were kept and flipped through the pages quickly. The grid code for this turn still references the old crossing. The captain leaned in, noticing that the radio call signs beside the altered section were written in slightly different handwriting. The strokes were sharper, rushed. He turned to the radio set mounted along the wall. "Signal the forward scout," he ordered. Static burst from the speaker, then fragments of voice, broken and distorted. The operator adjusted the dial. "Interference," he muttered. The nurse's expression tightened. "The interference began last night," she said. "I heard it from the infirmary when they tested frequencies." The captain glanced toward the window. "Coincidence?" he asked. "Not if someone wanted the wrong confirmation transmitted," she replied. The lieutenant crossed his arms defensively. "You're suggesting a coordinated effort." "Yes," she answered plainly. "Someone changed the route, altered the manifest, and ensured radio distortion so the convoy wouldn't question new coordinates." The captain walked to a cabinet along the far wall and withdrew the official authorization seal used for convoy approvals. He pressed it lightly against scrap paper. The imprint was crisp and even. Then he compared it to the seal on the altered document. The eagle's wing feather on the forged copy overlapped the circular border by a fraction of a millimeter. "Imperfect," he murmured. Rushed. Footsteps sounded in the corridor outside, hurried and uneven. The captain opened the door just enough to see Meyer speaking anxiously to another clerk, their whispers sharp and hurried. When Meyer noticed the captain's gaze, he stiffened and straightened his collar. The captain closed the door again without a word. "We need proof," the lieutenant said. "Not suspicion." The nurse pointed once more at the map. "Then compare the bridge elevation report from last week. The timber crossing cannot support the weight of the lead truck's current cargo." The lieutenant flipped through files, locating the engineering report. He read silently, then looked up, face draining of color. "She's right." The structural reinforcement was removed. The captain's decision crystallized. If the convoy turns there, they stall. If they stall, they're exposed. Outside, a distant whistle signaled readiness for departure. The captain snapped the map from its pins and rolled it tightly under his arm. "We move to the yard," he ordered. "If this is sabotage, we stop it before those trucks cross the gate." The nurse followed without hesitation, knowing that the next location would decide whether her accusation of forgery saved a column or sealed her fate. The supply yard vibrated with the synchronized growl of truck engines. Exhaust smoke drifting low across packed dirt as mechanics stepped back and drivers tightened gloves around steering wheels. Soldiers stood in staggered formation beside the convoy, rifles slung, awaiting the final signal to roll. The lead vehicle, heavier than the rest, bore fresh chalk markings along its side, numbers that matched the altered manifest in the captain's hand. When he emerged from the barracks with the nurse at his side, conversation thinned into wary silence. "Hold departure," the captain ordered sharply. A sergeant protested at once. "Sir, we've already delayed 12 minutes. Command won't—" "Hold," the captain repeated, stepping toward the first truck. The nurse moved beside him, scanning crate labels as if they were medical charts. The driver leaned down from the cab. "Everything's secured," he insisted. She shook her head. "Not everything." She pointed to the stacked crates nearest the rear wheel well. "Those are marked medical supply, but the weight is wrong," the sergeant scoffed. "You can't tell weight from sight." Without answering, she climbed onto the truck's rear step and pried at the lid of the nearest crate with the butt of a wrench. The wood splintered under pressure, and when the lid gave way, metal cylinders glinted beneath straw packing. The yard went still. "Detonators," the captain said under his breath. He signaled 2 soldiers forward. "Careful." The nurse examined the next crate, then another. "The medical crates were replaced," she said. "These are staged to ignite under shock." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the ranks. The sergeant's expression hardened. "Even if that's true, we don't know where it leads." The captain raised his voice enough to carry. "It leads to a timber crossing not rated for this load." The implication settled heavily. A stalled truck filled with unstable munitions, visible from a tree line where enemy scouts could wait unseen. The convoy commander strode across the yard, boots crunching gravel. "This delay borders on insubordination," he warned. The captain handed him the forged manifest. "Look at the seal," he said evenly. "Compare it." The commander hesitated, studying the ink difference, the misaligned emblem. Behind them, a clerk edged backward toward the storage sheds, eyes darting. The nurse noticed first. "He's leaving," she whispered. The captain snapped toward the movement. "Stop him!" 2 soldiers intercepted the clerk before he could slip behind the stacked fuel drums. The yard shifted from impatience to suspicion in seconds. The captain turned back to the truck. "Unload every crate from the lead vehicle," he ordered. "Inspect the rest." Drivers climbed down, some angered, some shaken. As the crates were lowered one by one, more inconsistencies surfaced. Labels mismatched, seals uneven, packing straw freshly disturbed. The nurse moved methodically, identifying discrepancies faster than the soldiers could process them. The convoy commander finally exhaled. If we had rolled out... He did not finish the sentence. The captain looked toward the gate, where the road bent east toward the river. We would have driven into a trap, he said. Engines idled uncertainly now, by no longer symbols of departure, but reminders of what nearly occurred. The yard that had moments ago bristled with impatience, now simmered with realization. The captain signaled for armed escort. Secure the clerk, he ordered, and bring him to the radio post. The mission had shifted from delay to exposure. The radio post sat at the edge of the yard beneath a corrugated tin overhang, wires strung like veins between poles, and the main barracks. Static hissed through the headset as the operator struggled to maintain contact with forward scouts, already positioned near the eastern approach. The captured clerk stood rigid between two armed soldiers, his face drained of color, but his jaw locked in stubborn silence. The convoy commander paced, agitation replacing earlier impatience. We cannot hold this yard indefinitely, he warned. Headquarters expects movement. The captain stepped to the radio table and took the headset from the operator without asking. This is Captain Halden, he transmitted. Confirm bridge status. The response fractured through interference. No unusual timber crossing clear, then dissolved into static again. The nurse leaned closer. They're confirming the wrong crossing, she said quietly. If the grid reference is altered, scouts are observing the reinforced bridge, not the timber one. The lieutenant exhaled sharply. That would explain the clean report. The convoy commander folded his arms. Or we are chasing shadows while supply lines stall. The captain removed the headset slowly, eyes steady. The explosives in that lead truck are not shadows. He turned toward the clerk. Who gave you the altered seal? The clerk said nothing. Sweat slid down his temple, but he did not speak. A distant engine revved again as drivers grew restless. A senior officer approached from the barracks, coat unbuttoned, expression dark. Why is the convoy still here? He demanded. The captain handed him the forged manifest without explanation. The officer scanned it briefly. Even if tampered, the correction can be filed after departure. The nurse stepped forward before the captain could respond. Sir, if that truck reaches the timber crossing, it will stall under load. Enemy scouts would have clear elevation from the tree line. The senior officer's gaze narrowed. You're a prisoner. I'm also a medic who treated 3 drivers last week and knows the weight distribution of that vehicle, she replied evenly. A tense silence followed. The captain watched the exchange, measuring the risk tightening around him. Defying a direct expectation to proceed would stain his record. But sending the convoy without certainty risked far more than paperwork. He turned to the radio operator. Switch frequencies, he ordered. Use reserve channel 3. The operator hesitated only a second before complying. Static surged again. Then a clearer voice broke through. Scout Unit 2 reporting. Timber crossing appears unguarded. Wait. Movement in the tree line. Gunfire crackled faintly over the line before cutting out. The yard froze. The senior officer's expression shifted from irritation to alarm. The captain replaced the headset. All vehicles remain, he commanded. Prepare defensive formation. Soldiers moved instantly, training overriding doubt. The clerk sagged slightly, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. The nurse met the captain's eyes. No triumph, only confirmation. He had chosen instinct over pressure. In that moment, the yard ceased to be a staging area and became a defensive perimeter. The convoy commander nodded once, conceding. If there's movement at the timber crossing, he said, voice tight, then someone wanted us there. The captain's gaze returned to the clerk. And someone made sure we would be. The decision came fast. The captain stepped onto the hood of the nearest truck, so every driver and rifleman could see him. We reroute, he ordered. Convoy splits into two columns. Half take the reinforced bridge under scout escort. The rest remain here as decoy. The yard erupted into motion. Engines cut, then restarted. Soldiers repositioned sandbags near the gate. The nurse moved beside the map now spread across the truck's hood, her finger tracing the alternate path toward the stone bridge farther south. "If they expect us at the timber crossing," she said, "they'll focus fire there. We use that." The lieutenant nodded. "We send an empty truck ahead along the original path. Draw them out." The captain considered it only a second. "Do it." A stripped vehicle, light and expendable, was rolled toward the gate, though its driver, instructed to accelerate hard, past the bend, before turning back under cover. The rest of the column reorganized with urgent precision. Ammunition crates were redistributed, detonators secured under guard. The captured clerk was bound and placed under watch near the radio post. His face turned toward the ground as if already condemned by unfolding events. The nurse climbed into the lead rerouted truck beside the captain, ignoring a soldier's surprised glance. "You stay," the captain began, but she cut him off. "I know the signal patterns they'll use," she replied. "If they try to redirect us again, I'll recognize it." He hesitated only briefly before nodding. The convoy rolled out. Gravel sprang beneath tires as the southern road curved toward thicker brush. Dust trailed behind them like a low storm. Over the radio, the decoy driver reported nearing the timber bend. Seconds later, static burst into sharp cracks. "Contact! Movement left tree line!" Gunfire echoed faintly through the speaker, confirming the trap. The captain did not slow. "Maintain route," he instructed his driver. "Increase speed." The nurse scanned the distant ridge ahead, eyes narrowed. "Lantern flash," she said suddenly, pointing toward a flicker near the southern bridge approach. "Two short, one long. That's a redirect signal." The captain grabbed the radio. "Ignore all light signals. Proceed to stone crossing." As they neared the bridge, he ordered two flanking squads to dismount and take position along the embankment. Then the plan was simple but bold. Lure the ambushers into revealing themselves at the timber crossing, while the real column slipped beyond their sight line and secured the reinforced span. The rumble of artillery in the far distance underscored the urgency. The supplies they carried would reinforce a sector already strained by enemy pressure. When the convoy reached the stone bridge, soldiers moved quickly, scanning shadows, rifles raised. The nurse leaned from the cab window, studying the tree line for patterns of unnatural stillness. Nothing. The bridge was clear. "They committed fully to the timber trap," the lieutenant confirmed over radio. "Decoy truck returning under fire but intact." The captain exhaled once, controlled, and measured. The rerouted column crossed the stone bridge in tight formation, the wheels thudding against reinforced planks, engines echoing over the river below. As the final truck cleared the span, he turned back toward the distant smoke, rising from the timber bend. "Now," he said quietly, "we close the trap on them." The stone bridge trembled under the weight of the final truck as it cleared the span, and the captain wasted no time issuing his next command. "Dismount half the column. Establish perimeter along the southern ridge," he ordered, voice steady despite the echo of distant gunfire still crackling through the radio from the timber crossing. Soldiers jumped from the truck beds and fanned out with practiced precision, boots crunching against gravel and scrub. The nurse stepped down beside the captain, scanning the horizon as smoke from the decoy's route drifted faintly above the tree line. Over the radio came strained breathing and scattered shots. "They took the bait," the lieutenant confirmed. "Enemy firing from elevated ground near the timber bend." The captain's jaw tightened. "Hold position. Do not engage beyond defensive fire." His plan required patience. If the ambushers believed the main convoy still approached the timber crossing, they would remain concentrated there. A sudden crack of rifle fire snapped through the air closer than expected. A bullet struck the bridge railing behind them, splintering wood. The nurse instinctively ducked as soldiers pivoted toward the sound. "Secondary team!" one rifleman shouted, spotting movement among brush near the southern embankment. The enemy had split their forces. The captain reacted instantly. "Left flank advance! Suppress and push!" He signaled 2 squads to sweep along the riverbank, while another secured the convoy trucks. The nurse crouched beside a wounded soldier who had fallen near the front axle, Bun quickly wrapping a bandage around his forearm, while glancing toward the skirmish unfolding across the grass. Gunfire erupted in controlled bursts as the flanking squad moved with discipline, forcing the hidden attackers into open ground. The nurse rose and pointed toward a cluster of reeds near the water's edge. "There," she said sharply. "Movement, 3 silhouettes." The captain relayed the sighting, and a volley of precise fire drove the attackers back. Smoke grenades hissed, clouding the riverbank as soldiers advanced under cover. Within minutes, resistance faltered. One saboteur attempted to flee toward the timber crossing trail, only to be intercepted by the returning decoy truck and its escort, which had looped back under fire but intact. The combined maneuver boxed the ambushers between 2 armed units. "Stand down!" the captain shouted, as enemy weapons clattered to the ground. Silence followed except for the distant hum of engines and the crackle of a smoldering bush. The lieutenant approached with grim confirmation. Explosives were placed along the timber approach. They intended to detonate once the lead truck stalled. The nurse felt the weight of that reality settle in. The false charge against her had nearly concealed a massacre. Soldiers began securing prisoners and gathering abandoned rifles, while medics checked minor injuries. The captain stepped toward the captured attackers, his gaze cold, but measured. "Who authorized the route change?" he demanded. One prisoner glanced involuntarily toward the direction of the camp. That was enough. The pieces aligned, forged seal, altered manifest, radio interference, staged ambush. When the captain turned back toward the bridge, where the convoy now waited safely, beyond the kill zone. "Signal camp," he ordered. "Inform them the trap failed." As the sun dipped lower, light reflecting off the river's surface, the soldiers looked from the bridge to the nurse with a new expression. No longer suspicion, but acknowledgement. She had seen what others missed. The captain met her eyes briefly, not with gratitude spoken aloud, but with silent confirmation that her warning had shifted the course of that day's battle. The convoy engines restarted in unison, ready to continue toward the front, not as victims of sabotage, but as a column that had just survived it. By the time the convoy returned through the camp gates under controlled escort, word of the failed ambush had already outrun the trucks themselves. Soldiers who had once gathered in accusation now stood in tight clusters, whispering as prisoners were marched past with bound wrists and lowered heads. The nurse walked beside the captain, not shielded behind him, not hidden, but moving at the same measured pace as the officers. The wooden post where she had been tied still stood in the yard, the severed rope hanging in frayed strands, like a reminder of how close the camp had come to condemning the wrong person. The colonel ordered assembly immediately. Boots struck the ground in formation while the captured saboteurs were positioned before the crowd. The clerk, pale and shaken, but avoided eye contact as documents were laid out on a portable table in the center of the square. The captain stepped forward first, holding up the forged manifest. "This seal was altered," he stated clearly. "The convoy route was changed to the timber crossing. Explosives were placed along that approach." A murmur rippled through the ranks. The colonel then addressed the gathered personnel, voice firm but controlled. An internal accomplice ensured this false charge would silence the one person who recognized the discrepancy. The clerk's shoulders sagged as evidence was presented. The mismatched stamp alignment, the smudged ink, the altered crate numbers, and the testimony of the captured attackers who had expected the lead truck at the compromised bridge. The nurse stood still, hands clasped behind her back, eyes steady. She did not seek vindication. She only waited for the facts to speak. The colonel turned toward her. "You were accused publicly," he said. "You will be acknowledged publicly." The yard fell silent. "Your warning prevented the loss of this convoy and the men it carried." A few soldiers lowered their heads, shame replacing earlier suspicion. The captain did not interrupt or embellish. He allowed the moment to remain official and measured. The colonel ordered the false charge struck from record and reassigned the nurse temporarily to logistics review pending further commendation. As the clerk was escorted away under guard, the tension that had gripped the camp for hours began to dissolve. The rope was removed from the post and dropped into a disposal bin. Soldiers who had once watched her binding now stepped aside to allow her clear passage through the yard. No applause broke out, no dramatic cheers. Only a quiet shift in posture and gaze that carried more weight than noise. The captain met her briefly at the edge of the formation. "You saw what others overlooked," he said evenly. She replied, just as calmly. "You chose to listen." Engines started once more, not in urgency, but in renewed purpose. The convoy would depart again, this time along the secure route. The camp that had nearly condemned a loyal observer now prepared to move forward under a corrected command. Months later, the stone bridge stood reinforced with additional steel bracing. Its once quiet crossing now recognized as a strategic artery, feeding the frontline sector beyond the river. The convoy that had nearly been diverted toward destruction had delivered its ammunition and medical supplies on time, strengthening a defense line that intelligence reports later confirmed would have collapsed without reinforcement. The ripple effect of that single reroute extended farther than the camp yard, where a rope had once tightened around a prisoner's wrists. In a converted warehouse near the forward depot, the nurse now worked at a long wooden table, layered with manifests and route overlays. Her responsibilities expanded beyond medical care into logistics review and pattern verification. She moved with the same precision she had shown that morning in the yard, checking stamps, seal alignment, and crate codes with disciplined attention. Soldiers passing through the depot recognized her not as the accused woman tied to a post, but as the officer liaison who had helped secure their supply chain. The captain, recently reassigned to oversee convoy security across multiple sectors, visited the depot one evening to review updated protocols. He paused briefly at her station. "The new seal design reduces forgery risk," he observed. She nodded. "And the radio reserve channel remains clear. No repeat of that interference." There was no need to revisit the humiliation or the accusations. Both understood that the impact of that day had been measured not in apology, but in prevention. Official reports later cited the disrupted ambush as a decisive moment that preserved not only vehicles and ammunition, but morale within a vulnerable unit. The captured saboteurs had revealed a broader infiltration effort, leading to tightened security across the region. As twilight settled over the depot, the captain stepped outside and looked toward the distant road where convoys now moved under stricter oversight. He did not see the rope, the crowd, or the accusation anymore. He saw a column that continued to move because one warning had been heard. Inside, the nurse sealed a final document for dispatch and set it carefully into the outgoing tray. The war would continue with new dangers, new routes, and new tests of judgment. But that night remained a quiet benchmark within the unit, a reminder that vigilance could overturn falsehood before it became tragedy. When the next convoy rolled out under fading light, its engines steady and unthreatened, it carried more than supplies. It carried the lesson that a single decision, made in a yard heavy with suspicion, had redirected not only trucks, but the outcome of a battle line. War tests more than strength. It tests judgment. If this story moved you, like and subscribe to Clara at War for more. WWII mission dramas where decisions change destinies. History is not only written by generals. Sometimes, it is redirected by the moment someone chooses to listen.